welcome. We're not going to discuss it anymore. I'm just going to introduce us. This space is G.R.O.W. For those of you who haven't been here, we hope you'll come back and make use of it. I'm Marguerite Oliver. I'm the Interim Associate Dean of Graduate Studies. Agnes, many of you have met or talked to. She's here all the time when Karis isn't here. So those two folks are our GAs. I want to move right along, though, to introduce you to Dr. Vanda. She is an assistant professor in educational leadership. She teaches research and other stuff.
Yep.
And she has a whole lot of information for you this morning. So if you're going to work on a thesis or on your dissertation, she's the person who's going to help you get started. Thank you.
Right. I appreciate that. Thank you. Is this on? I'm assuming this is on already? It's on. Can y'all hear me? I feel like it's on.
It is for recording.
It's for the...
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right, well, good. Was it mid-morning? It's noon. It's early for me. Morning still. Thank you for coming out on a Saturday. It's an hour and a half, so any of you have taken courses with me face-to-face, we typically never get through like one activity. And I have 3 for here for an hour and a half, right? Michelle's like, yes. So the third one we're not going to get to, but it's one of the handouts. And I'll explain it kind of as we go through and have maybe perhaps an alternative option where we can get together again and debrief that at a separate date and time if you have availability. And so this presentation is going to be about framing research questions, clarifying theoretical orientation and design. I'm starting my 4th year as an assistant professor of ed leadership. This is going to be interactive because I'm an interactive person. So in courses, everything's very student-centered. I don't sit and lecture, so it was very difficult for me to put this PowerPoint together because I don't think I've ever it's been a while since I put a PowerPoint together. So basically what we're going to do for the presentation overview is activity 1 is going to be making sense of your world. Then we're going to talk about philosophical assumptions. Activity 2 is going to get at what does this have to do with research. Then the next thing is we'll talk about philosophical assumptions that undergird methodology. Then the connection to your research design. So activity 3 we're not going to get to, but that's basically a heuristic, and we'll talk about that as we go through it, as we get to that particular point. And then I'm just going to give you practical tips to align research questions and clarifying theoretical orientation and design. And we're going to talk about challenges. Not that any of y'all might have any challenges, but in case you have questions about challenges that you're having now or that you're experiencing, we can have a discussion about that as well. So the last part, particularly when it gets to the questions, is really important because I want to be able to address any questions you might have. But you also can ask questions as we go through. So please don't think that it's me and you're sitting there as a receptacle. Like, if you have questions, then ask a question, and I'd be happy to have the discussion. So activity 1. Here we go, making sense of your world. So here are your guided instructions. So reflect on the statement below. Choose your stance to determine if you agree, disagree, or are neutral about the statement. So think about the statement. It reads, I believe that the way of knowing the world is comprised of truths with a lowercase t as opposed to truth, capital T. Agree, disagree, neutral. Do we need to define truths being lowercase and true being uppercase? Okay, so when we have a lowercase t, which means that multiple truths exist. So I know the world because there are multiple realities that comprise the world. Or do I believe that there is one singular objective truth to the world in the way that I see things? We're talking about the way you know your world. So think about the different microcosms in which you encompass in your life. And are you more apt to believe that there's multiple truths or multiple perspectives, or is there generally one single truth? Agree, disagree, or neutral with a statement. I believe that the way of knowing the world is comprised of truths as opposed to truth. Does anybody disagree with the statement?
Okay. Well,
Frederick, why?
I believe there's multiple truths.
Okay.
Depending on what area you're talking about.
Okay.
Some areas might have a truth. If you're researching a particular area, it might be guided by certain things that lead to a truth. And then if you go to another area, that might lead to another truth.
Okay.
So I believe there's multiple.
Okay.
multiple truths.
Okay, so it's neither agree or disagree, but neutral. You could be both, or you could occupy both in the sense. Yeah? Okay. Great point, Frederick. Anybody else? Somebody else? I'm sorry, I said anybody else like we had a choice. Somebody else? Thoughts about the statement? I believe. I'm sorry?
What kind of truth?
Okay.
Real truth?
Okay.
Stop sign is red. Is there more than one truth to that?
Okay.
But then there are truths that are not true
Okay.
in nature and
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. There are some things that we see that are absolute truths that we cannot deny that the stop sign is typically red. Right?
If someone who's colorblind, it's red. That's what I was gonna say.
Okay. But if you're colorblind, then you can't see the red. Maybe we can just see the shape. Which is a good point. Other thoughts? How should teach middle schools have excellent wait time? Other thoughts?
But then again, you have multiple perspectives.
Right.
So, yeah, like everybody's saying, you have multiple points of view.
So, yeah, so where do you lie in this particular statement about the non-trivial things?
It's not trivial, then it's going to be, for me, multiple truths. If it's concrete and central to who I am, then there's going to be an absolute truth.
Okay. So we're still switching back and forth, right? This statement's really loaded because it's very difficult to answer this question. Because it depends on what we're talking about. Most people, if I was raised Catholic, so most people I was taught that the Bible was the truth, right? I mean, there is a capital T to X, Y, and Z. I believe that now because I think the interpretation is different. But at particular times, right, we believe that there is a capital T, whereas other times it might be a small t. But this is very central into what we're talking about here because if you look at before I go to the next slide, if we look at the map of the world right here, it's a thumbprint. Everybody has a completely unique thumbprint. Nobody's is the same. There's billions of people in this world and nobody's thumbprint is the same. The DNA is different. So the statement's very difficult to address. It's very difficult to answer. Whether it's in a philosophical way or even in the way that you're trying to examine it, it's very difficult. It's not an easy question to even make sense of, to be quite honest with you. So this points us to the notion that that particular statement is all related to philosophical assumptions. So when we talk about the basis of philosophical assumptions, we have ontology, which is the nature of reality. What exists? What is the nature of reality for me? Right? If our thumbprints are different, we're all different. So your ontology, your ontological perspective, or your ontological lens is that notion of what exists. What is the nature of reality? What is the nature of reality? Okay, ontology is what is the nature of reality. So we get down to epistemology, or epistemology is the way you make sense of the world in relation to other people outside of yourself. So how do I see myself in terms of others? How am I making sense of the world? If I have an ontological perspective about the nature of reality, is that because my epistemology is guided by things that are objective or things that are value-laden, or that what is the tell for you? Your relationship to others and how you make sense of your world, which is your ontological lens, that what is the nature of reality? Axiology is this notion of the value-laden process. We're conducting research. Do we believe that research should be value-free, or it should be biased or unbiased? I'll say biased, unbiased, quote unquote.
Should not be biased.
Right, so we have ontology, epistemology, and axiology. That's your value-based judgment, right? So the purpose of the Venn diagram is that when we get to Venn diagrams, there's a particular portion where we meet here, right? All three of them connect at some point. And that is where your philosophical alignment occurs. You have to philosophically align your ontological lens, your epistemological lens, and your axiological lens. They all feed into this philosophical alignment. Oh, this is really deep. Sorry, it's really early Saturday. Your philosophical alignment lies in between all three, right? So your ontology, which is what? The nature of reality, right? What exists? What's the nature of my reality, right? And your epistemology is what? Yeah, your sense of the world in relation to others. Are you interdependent or are you dependent of those individuals to make sense of the world for you? And axiology is that value-laden process. What is it associated with? When it all connects in the middle, we have the philosophical alignment. That philosophical alignment is incredibly important. Why, you ask? What does this have to do with research? So if you have a phone with you, and if you type in this, I probably need to update this, don't I?
There's something wrong with this computer, the internet.
Oh, it doesn't work? Oh, okay. Okay, it's okay. So if we...
already, but...
You're fine. So let me put it up on my phone. So ideally, we would able to see your statement. So, okay, so what does this have to do with research? My apologies, we can't see it. If you go to the link, it'll generate. So what does ontology, axiology, and epistemology have to do with research? Does it have anything to do with research? So you can probably still go to that link and you'll be able to see that. What are you entering in? What does that have to do with research?
Would one of these philosophies drive your research?
Okay, and how would it drive your research?
Your perspective, your point of view,
Yeah.
how you view things
Yeah.
according to that philosophy.
Right, how you view things according to your philosophy, right? So if you're designing a study, you have to design research questions and choose a theoretical framework. Is it going to be quantitative? Is it going to be qualitative? But that's not something that magically appears. You've already generated ideas about what you kind of want to look at, right? We all have ideas, right? Like, I think maybe this might be a good topic for me, right? But the way that we make sense of that through our ontological, our epistemological, and the axiological lens is going to drive the research process. Philosophical assumptions, without a doubt, all the time, in every case, undergirds methodology. It drives your research process. Okay, that's why it's really important to know your stance on ontological, epistemological, and axiological. That's incredibly important. Sometimes people come in and they'll say, I want to do a quantitative study. And I'm like, well, how do you know? Well, I don't know, because I think I'll be done quicker. Well, okay, but how do you how do you know it's quantitative? Or how do you know you want to do a qualitative study? Because we don't often examine philosophically where we stand. We just experience the world every day and say, okay, this is what I believe because of X, Y, and Z. Even if somebody is saying something different, I don't ascribe to their particular perception of the reality of this particular phenomena, right? So we find ourselves in conundrums sometimes when we can't explain it. But the research process is really about just doing this. Those philosophical assumptions underneath drive your methodology, and they drive your research process. So we have quantitative and qualitative, which are the two main methodologies, right, for research. So if you're quantitative, you typically operate out of a positivist paradigm. Right? And if you're qualitative, there's several paradigms. There's about 6 paradigms. Okay, there's positivist, post-positivist, constructivist, interpretivist, critical, post-structuralist, and postmodernist. There's 6 paradigms of thought. If you've read Thomas Kuhn's The Scientific Evolution, he talks about how research has shifted paradigms throughout time. Okay. So for the sake of simplifying the fact that it's an hour and a half workshop, is we have quant and we have qual. So your quant are typically positivist, your qual are typically constructivist, or your interpretivist. Okay. In your ontological lens, quantitative people believe that there is a single reality. There is one truth. This is it. Your qualitative researchers believe that multiple realities exist by situations, participants, context. Right? The reality is not determined by one absolute truth. Epistemological, when we talk about the researcher's role, quantitative researchers believe that there should be a separation between the researcher and participants. That's why they call them subjects. Hurts my feelings, but that's why they call them subjects. Right? Because they believe that you have to be independent, the distant view. I cannot make an assumption about somebody because I have to be objective. Like, I need to be objective. I can't have a biased view about a phenomena that I'm examining, because if I believe in one truth, then I can't believe in multiple realities. And if you and I are friends, think about when you don't know somebody, but you can be more objective about that person, and you know somebody, and you can say, well, they're just having a bad day. They don't really mean, right? Because you have a connection with them in some way. So when we talk about this epistemological, qualitative people believe that you should have a close distance. You're involved in the research. You interview. If you sit down and you do ethnographic studies, you're immersed in the culture. You talk to people. You try to determine if situation, context, their demographics, how all of that plays into their role, their perception of what the truth is. Okay. Axiological is that value and judgment. Quantitative, again, it goes back to being objective, value-free. Bless you. That you have to be unbiased, right? So there's no personal statement. You are separated from the research themselves. You send out a survey. You run all sorts of lovely numbers, but you never meet them. You don't care to meet them. I'm not saying that's wrong or right. Roman's saying no because he's doing quant. So if you're doing quant, I'm not saying that that's the wrong way. But when we talk about what the methodological frameworks looks in with our philosophical assumptions, is that we think that you have to be objective. Because if you're not objective, you taint findings for your phenomena. But that's what quantitative researchers ascribe to, based on their ontology, their epistemology, and their axiology when it comes to the research of their particular phenomena. What about qualitative researchers? We're subjective. We believe that value that, and there's bias. If you're doing a qualitative study of any proportion, whether it's a case study, an ethnographic study, you typically have a positionality statement. Because you know that if my research looks at Latinas in engineering, high achieving Latinas in engineering from an asset-based lens, right? My positionality is being a Hispanic female. I'm not in engineering, growing in a culture where we're highly underrepresented in certain areas. You have to be open about that. That has to be your positionality has to be transparent when it comes to being a qualitative researcher. Because I'm letting you know this is how I'm framing the world, and I believe we're all interconnected. Does anybody have any questions? Because we look really quiet. About anything so far?
I do.
Yes, sir.
Is it possible to do a dissertation using both?
Yes. Right. So we have mixed methods. So you can do quant or qual, or you can do a mixed method study. My training is that you have to be, you're a purist one way or the other. That you can't you cannot encompass, I can't look at Latinas in engineering and say that I value truth from an objective lens if my paradigm or aligns with those philosophical assumptions that multiple realities exist. So my training, qualitative-wise, when I was in College Station, is that you have to be a purist. Although I've seen it, but it's a very intricate. The process is very intricate if you do a mixed methods, right? Because a lot of people think mixed methods is I'm going to interview people and I'm going to collect descriptive statistics, and that makes it mixed methods. That is not mixed methods. Mixed methods, you have to dive deep into paradigms of thought and so forth before it becomes an authentic mixed method study. So a lot of people think like, well, I can just collect some data and send out a questionnaire for 10 people and I'll interview these 10 people and that makes it mixed methods. That's not mixed methods, right? So you can definitely do a mixed method study. You'd have to have somebody, your methodology should have to be very skilled to be able to, or you'd have two different types of methodologies that can work well together to help cultivate those philosophical, right? Because all of this is going to guide your research questions and your theoretical framework, and it's going to guide the method which you employ, right? And if you're coming from two different paradigms of thought or two different philosophical assumptions, then it gets kind of messy. It's not impossible, but it gets kind of messy. Roman.
We was talking about, especially on the quantitative part, I see exactly what you're talking about. And as I got my results and everything from back, that's where the recommendations came forward to add qualitative portions of the type of studies, because I saw things that I was like, wow, I need to add more, add more power to this study, because just adding that was just not enough. I don't know why they answered the way they answered. It was just either they selected the answer or didn't.
Right.
And nothing else was covered about, like you said. It was just getting the answer what they asked.
Right.
And so again, with the mixed methods, adding qualitative, you start seeing this in your studies, and you even start adding more research questions.
Right.
Actually, even once you complete at the end.
Right.
So eventually, somebody may even have another study that they do afterward.
Right.
And so everything makes sense now as to what we've been talking these past 2-3 years.
Right. Right.
And so it's like, okay, so I understand now.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Right. Yeah. It's like a come to, right? It comes at the end, and I think that happens for everybody. That happened for me was that when I was in grad school, and it still does sometimes. Like, oh, that's what they were trying to. Might be a few weeks later or a year later, but it's like it comes full circle, right? And it's not to say that one type of methodology is better than the other, because it's not, because they both inform each other. Right, like Roman's example. Okay, did a quantitative study. He's getting ready to defend his dissertation next week. But one of their recommendations is maybe we need more qualitative work. Right, so we both, it informs each other. No one is better than the other. Quantitative research has been around longer than qualitative research. But they're both equally valid forms of research methods, research methodologies. Okay, I don't want to say one's better than the other just because my lens is tainted one way. Right, because they're both, we need both. So here's a connection to research design. Right, let's get back to like number 4 on the bottom. It says the methodological process really is what's the research process. Positivist or quantitative researchers believe in deduction, whereas naturalists, or that's your qualitative researchers, your constructivists, believe in induction. So when we talk about methodology, the premise of the research process is that if you're doing a quantitative study, you're going to want to predict a particular outcome, right? Because we believe that you can hold things constant and we predict X, Y, and Z outcome, right? What are the effects of after-school tutoring for English language learners passing the 3rd grade? You're trying, right, the status. So you're trying to create a cause and effect, or you're trying to prove an effect. You can only do that type of stuff, those type of questions in quantitative research. If you're trying to predict something that's going to happen, that's quantitative in nature. Your qualitative is inductive in nature, meaning that your findings emerge from data analysis. There's no a priori, right? So if you're doing quantitative research, you have an a priori, which suggests that I can predict what I think is going to happen if I throw a survey out based on what the literature tells me. this is what I'm going to get. And I'm going to measure that through a sig level, right? A significance value. Qualitative researchers don't do that. You walk into a study with no a priori, meaning that I don't know what I'm going to get. I'm just going to create a sample size. I'm going to create, the population, be very purposeful about everything, and I'm going to see what emerges from the data analyses. You don't know what it's going into. Because if you believe that multiple truths exist, then you cannot impose your truth on what you think is going to come out. But if you're quantitative and you believe that there is only one single truth, then I have to be objective. Then if I think that X times Y is always going to give you Z, then that's how you always frame your particular research questions, in a predictive mode, because you feel like you can hold everything constant. Any questions? The rhetorical is really just the language of the write-up, so that's not something.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I don't even know how to frame this, but I'm going to try.
Go ahead.
So with quantitative, my understanding is that I make this, hypothesis or whatever, and if my research doesn't back it up, if it doesn't prove what I'm saying is going to happen, I go back to square one, correct?
No,
Okay.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Right, because you would for quantitative research, you typically, and I'm not a quantitative researcher,
Right,
but I'll tell you, you would set up a set of hypotheses and assumptions that you think that are typically more questions than you do in a qualitative study. And so if it doesn't show what you're trying to find, right? If you don't get the significance level, you might get the significance level on some of the hypotheses, but not on all of the
But
hypotheses.
if I don't get any for any of them, I go back to square one, correct? I mean, that's my understanding in all my stats classes, but if I'm wrong, but my point in all of this is that's never true in qual, correct?
Right, correct.
Seems much less risky to do a qual study then, in terms of getting it done. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just, yeah.
Okay, say it again. Say the last part again.
And it doesn't matter in
Right.
the grand scheme, because
Right.
your question is your question.
Right.
It's either going to be quant or qual, like it just
Right.
is. It's not like you choose exactly, it's more like the question drives
Right.
quant or qual.
Right.
But like, I can see how, as a PhD student, like, you choose this thing in quant, right? And then it doesn't back up that's a huge risk. Versus qual, where I feel like it's, so you can tell where I'm going with this, because like, it just feels like qual you can always come up with an answer. Like, I don't even know how to frame that better.
No, you're fine. But in qual, we co-construct the reality or whatever emerges from data analyses, right? But it doesn't mean that qual is easier than quant. Many people argue, depending on your philosophical assumptions.
Right.
Like if you believe in multiple truths and in multiple ways to construct your phenomena, we can talk about quant all day, and it's never going to make sense to you.
Right.
Right? Because you're never going to value that particular truth that you're creating. So remember that your dissertation is going to create truth.
Right.
You're going to copyright truth attached to your name, and I'm going to add this particular minuscule truth nugget into this particular phenomena.
Right.
I think that they're both equally risky.
Interesting.
Because as a qualitative researcher, you have to know your positionality, and there's much criticism about being biased in how you're interpreting the findings, right? Which some have said which is why it's taken a while for qualitative research to gain credence in the research field. It's moving that way now, given all sorts of things. But there's more credence for qualitative researchers now than quant, even probably more so for mixed methods. So.
Right. Okay.
Which is a great question. But because stats, you're banking on, this is what I'm going to find because this is what it tells me. And if it doesn't, then it kind of throws.
Oh yeah, I remember sitting in those classes and the whole class going,
Yeah.
What do you mean if it doesn't, like,
Right.
Isn't it valid to show that it didn't matter? And then the statistician said, no.
Right.
Nope.
Right, and that's because when you go to statisticians who are pure statisticians, and you talk about their philosophical assumptions and where they're aligned, that's the only, right, like, it's wrong, I'm going to discard it. So if you were a post-positivist, right? Positivists believe absolute truth. It's either this or it's not this, right? Your post-positivist will say, we got lots of outliers here, so there's probably some research that needs to be done on them, and let's kind of examine how we can move that forward. Where positivists just kind of toss everything out, like, all right, we have to start. We'll go back to the because it doesn't answer, right? But if you're really steeped in that particular paradigm or that positivist paradigm, you don't shift your paradigm over.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And so when you so let's say you did a study and it was quantitative and you got no significance on any, I don't want to put that in the universe for you, but let's just say like that's, right. Let's just say,
It's all good.
so let's say that's what happens. And so you as a researcher now, based on the findings, could go back and revisit your philosophical assumptions and say, I have the right survey, I got the X number of participant responses that I needed, I did every single thing to try to replicate the findings from the last 20 years, and it found nothing. Right? So either A, you could scrap it, or B, you could say, why didn't I find anything? Okay, so maybe I need to add another layer of statistics to understand or to reframe a survey to say why it didn't add. So not to scrap it completely, but a post-positive, when you shift that paradigm, will kind of say, it didn't answer it. So let me see why it didn't answer it. Let me send out another survey and reframe it in that sense. And include that in the dissertation. It'll be longer, but I don't know if that's helpful. But yeah.
Incredibly helpful,
Okay.
actually, what you just said.
Okay.
So thank you.
Yeah, so you can,
And I'm sorry, it was poorly worded.
No, you're fine. It's a lot.
Together, so.
It's a lot. I know when you look at either you sit in stats or qual courses, if you're not emotionally drained after, I don't say drained, emotionally dead when you walk out of either of those courses, then it's not the right, I mean, it's a lot to kind of pull in your head. There's a great question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I was just saying, when you do quantitative, you may not get the prediction that you were looking for.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't gotten any results.
Right.
You know, because I've done one before where I was studying personality.
Right.
And my hypothesis was wrong.
Right.
But we had significance in the agreeableness dimension of personality,
Right.
which was something that we didn't even suspect.
Right. Yep. Because when you don't find the thing, so those of you who are quantitative people, so when you don't find what you need, there's other mechanisms to run, right? You run MANOVAs, or there's other things that you can run to see, like, okay, this isn't what I found, but maybe there's significance in X, Y, and Z. And then obviously with your methodologies, you kind of span out what that looks like to see, like, okay, maybe this is the reason this gave me this particular response. But absolutely, right? It might not be, the hypothesis might not be proven, it might be disproven, but if you have significance in one of those other metrics, then it still has credence to your findings. So I think everything has a credence to your finding. It just depends on how you examine it. Right? The lens is different from the qual and quant perspective, because you do believe that the multiple perspectives exist with qualitative research. Joycelyn.
I wanted
Both great statements. Thank you.
to kind of respond to Marine's question about the risk, because we've been in the same stats classes.
Yeah.
But someone, myself, who kind of identifies with qualitative research, not kind of, I mostly do, is that I think the risk is different, because my risk isn't looking for a specific a priori or a number or a significance.
Right.
The risk for me is, am I giving due diligence to the participants? Is their story, does their story have credibility? And is it adding to the research, to my field of research?
Right.
So the risk for me is I have to count on human aggregate.
Right.
That's a different type of risk than just administer
Right.
a survey, which there's nothing wrong with either or, because
Right.
the more I'm in this program, the more I do realize that they do inform one another. You
Right.
need one without the other.
Right.
I don't know that there is issues with underrepresented population, because that's what quantitative has shown me. But now
Right.
I want to go in there as a qualitative researcher to find, okay, what is that
Right.
misrepresentation? Why has these populations been minoritized? So for me, the risk is different, because there's
Right.
a level of responsibility to my participants.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, it's a good point. Because when we talk about qualitative, you're a qualitative researcher, and we're interviewing participants, and we know that the data analysis it emerges from you, right? And it's a result of the co-construction between you and the participants. And so qualitative researchers are very cautious about not colonizing what the narrative is for individuals. That might not seem like a big deal, but that's really a big deal if people take depending on whatever it is that you're examining, but you take an hour or 2 hours of their time and you get to know them and you systematically analyze what they've said, and then you take their narratives and colonize them to make them yours without their perspectives. That's a very difficult thing to be able to do quite efficiently, where you give due diligence to your participants, because typically those participants are going to be, people don't sit and talk to you for an hour, hour and a half just for fun, particularly in studies. They really get at the questions you're trying to get to. Good point, Jason. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Do qualitative studies have any kind of bearing or importance in research projects that do not involve humans? Like if I'm studying fish, is that even relevant?
It depends on what exactly you're looking at in relation to fish. So it might not impact the fish themselves, but it might impact the way the fish are handled around. So if you're doing qual, it's more of like the human interconnection with interdependency with individuals. So you can probably, that's a really good question. You can if you have like a social science or human component to understanding fish, whether like how often people fish there, or I don't know, in that sense. But not fish impact. Did that answer your question? I wasn't sure. Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? This is a lot to digest in an hour and a half. It's a lot to kind of go through. Okay, so we're not probably, so you have a heuristic chart. Let me explain you should have it, right? So we didn't ideally go through, I don't have a copy of it. We didn't ideally go through I'm going to borrow some of these, sorry. The different paradigms, but if you look on the left-hand side, those are all the paradigms. I forgot critical, my apologies. So critical should go there after constructivist. So we should have positivist, post-positivist, constructivist, and then critical, and then post-structuralist and postmodern. Okay, so those are the 6 paradigms of thought. Every paradigm is guided by philosophical assumptions. Okay, if you're not sure how you make sense of the world or how you create nature, or if you're not sure about any of that, start to look at which paradigm you're operating out of. Because at the end of the day, your philosophical assumptions are components that create the paradigm in which you operate. Because paradigms are the structures in which we make meaning of our life, either through, and it includes methods, who we think are data sources, who are sources of knowledge for us. So it takes that philosophical level and kind of encapsulates it in different paradigms. So if you're not sure which one it's in, which one you're operating in relation to your phenomena. Okay, so think about it in that sense. And you won't always stay in the same paradigm. Right, so initially before I kind of operated more as an interpretivist or constructivist paradigm, but now I very much operate from a critical paradigm in the last 5 years or so. But so it shifts with you. It can. Remember that we shift paradigms when we come across a particular anomaly that can no longer be answered. And that's when we start to, like the example you gave, right? This is all the hypotheses, nothing was proven, maybe there was no significance level. Now what? Right? So if we're operating out of a particular paradigm and then we have questions that are not proven, then that may be able to instigate a shift in the paradigm or how we make sense of the particular phenomenon we're looking at and saying, okay, none of this turned out this way, why not? Or constructivist in the sense that when I was younger, I would think like, oh, people construct their own realities. Everybody has, everybody experiences life differently, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was a shift somewhere along, probably when I came into the academy, that I realized the intersections of race and gender when it comes to certain experiences for me as a faculty member. And that's when I was like, okay, this is not constructivism anymore. Like there's something else going on in terms of how I'm making sense of the nature of my reality in this particular cosm. Okay. we did this in the qualitative course, it's a while to, I mean, it takes a minute to fill it out. So it's not like something we could fill out whenever. But it gives you the ontology, the epistemology, the axiology, methodology, and then potential theoretical frameworks and research questions and methods, right? So everything is aligned together, right? So if you're operating from a critical framework, but you're using a survey, you're not aligning it. There should be cohesion. So we talk about research questions, and we talk about theoretical frameworks, and we talk about the method that we're going to use. It should all be completely aligned, right? So there's several texts. I can tell you the qualitative ones: Cresswell text, the Lincoln and Guba text, anything that's Merriam text. I can send out a list of references that goes through and talks about, in these paradigms, these are methods that are appropriate here. Everything is aligned together. Sometimes we don't think about that. So sometimes I have people come and tell me, I'm gonna do quantitative, but I really want to interview 11 people. It's like, well, you can't, it's not quantitative. Like there's a mismatch, and there can't be a mismatch. So when you go back to the first philosophical assumptions and you align your ontology with your epistemology and your axiology, and that little spot where your alignment is at philosophically, once you have that down, then you know that that is how you're going to frame everything else. Your research questions, when you figure those three out in terms of your philosophical assumptions, it will help drive the design of your course, the design of your study. And more importantly, the theoretical framework you're going to use, right? So the theoretical framework should should serve as a guide to what to look for, but it doesn't tell you what to see. So if we're thinking about critical frameworks, you have to go back and look at critical race studies, or you look at lat crit, or you expand on those theories that fall within that paradigm. If you know what paradigm you're operating under, then you can research those particular paradigms and look at theories that fall under those paradigms that might help frame what you're trying to get at based on your research questions. Right, so you have your philosophical assumptions, which is the axiology, epistemology, and the ontology. And then you throw in the methodology. All of that is encapsulated. The larger umbrella over all that is what creates your paradigm. The umbrella is the paradigm. The dominant lens, yeah. It's the dominant lens in which you're making sense of the nature of reality, the way you think that I'm constructing the nature of reality, right? We can read surveys all the time. If you're a qual person and you read surveys about any topic, then you'd say, a lot of times I'll read them and I'm like, that's not true. I know people who would never, right? Or you read studies or comments like, oh, so-and-so stated this, or X, Y, and Z, and then you say, and you're a quant person, you're like, that's not true, because that's just one or two people. That's not the general consensus, because we have polls that say X, Y, and Z, right? And you go back and forth, right? So if you're not sure what lens you're operating out of, you probably already know, you just haven't examined it. Okay? But that's the first step when you're thinking about the research design process, research questions, and theoretical orientation, is you have to know the umbrella in which you fit under in the paradigm. There's 6 of them. I took an entire epistemology course over an entire semester, and that still wasn't enough. But there's 6 paradigms. And so if you think you're quant-oriented, you're going to do positivist, or you're going to be post-positivist. If you're qual, everything else is qualitative. Okay, so if you kind of think, well, I think I'm a quant person because I really do think that I make sense of my reality through numbers and it's yes or no and I can prove X, Y, and Z, then you're going to be positivist or post-positivist. In relation to the phenomena you want to explore. That's the key, right? Because we all believe I might have certain truths, capital T, in certain aspects of my life, and other ones are the small t's. Right? So all these questions that we're looking at, or the discussion, think about it in the terms of, think of the phenomena you want to look at. And if you're not clear on what phenomena specifically, if you have an idea of the population you want to look at, or the topic you want to look at, if you're already doing your courses, and you have an opportunity to Choose whatever topic it is for an assignment, whether it's law or leadership, or it doesn't matter, whatever it is. Always go to what you think you're going to examine, even if it's a year and a half out. Okay, because that'll start to inform your lens at a broader, it'll start your lit review basically. We're obviously not going to get through the heuristic chart because there's no way. I mean, we would probably take like 2 or 3 hours or longer than that to get through that. So I spoke with Dr. Oliver and I told her that if any of y'all wanted to complete the chart, I can send a Word document, I get emails out, and you can take some time to complete it, and maybe towards the end of the semester, we can meet again informally and just workshop the heuristic chart so we can have discussions about where we think we lie or not lie, or which paradigm we're at. And if I think I'm here, then what are the best methods to go to, or what's the best theoretical frameworks, and so forth. So I will get the email addresses of everybody who's here so that I can send that out, and then I'll coordinate with them and I'll send out a doodle poll for the latter part of the semester and see when we can get the most, if not everybody, back in so that we can literally just workshop this particular handout. Okay. So think about what it is that you want to examine or what you're looking at in terms of your phenomena. Right? Peer debriefing is the best way to kind of get at it for a long time. Like you really have to sit and have these lengthy discussions and so forth. So that's something that I'd be happy to do so we can follow up with that, because I knew that wasn't. But that chart has been very useful for me. It was as a graduate, when I was a graduate student. It was very time consuming, but it's very useful because it allows me to really think about where I lie in each of these paradigms in relation to the phenomena that I wanted to examine. Any comments, questions, statements? Do we need a hug? Saturday. It's not raining. So practical tips to align research questions, clarifying theoretical orientation and design. Hands down, the heuristic's the best way to get at it. You just really have to sit and think about it in relation to your phenomena. What is it that I want to look at? But that doesn't magically appear, right? So obviously you have to examine at length your own philosophical assumptions. If you've never thought about it, you need to start thinking about it. What is the nature of reality for me? How do I define that? In general. And then you put it in the scope of your phenomena, because it drives it, right? Most qualitative researchers will come in and say, even before they know that they're qualitative researchers, they'll come in and say, just in basic discussions that we have in the office, I'll in my head, I'm like, they're qualitative. I can totally, like right off the bat, pick up when people are qualitative and when people are quantitative. In basic conversations that have nothing to do with research and has nothing to do with a book for class we're reading, it has nothing to do with any of that, because all of that drives the way we're making sense of the phenomena that we want to examine. We're just looking at it within an academic setting now, right, within the dissertation.
So now I'm thinking, I want to go have a conversation with you, and I want you to tell me.
No.
You tell me, so I'm sorry.
Well, and I think what happens is for students who I advise or who just come and see me, I believe in that iterative process, and it's very arduous. I'm like, I knew what you were 8 months ago, but I need you. I need you to get there, because
isn't that funny? But the fact that I want you to tell me yes or no, that's kind of.
It's very quantitative in nature.
Isn't
Yep,
it?
it is.
It's not about that.
Yeah.
No, just tell me. I'm good.
It is very quantitative in nature. But I think most people too, right? Because it's a long process, and that goes back to some of these other, right here before we get to it, is that you have to know your philosophical assumptions. You have to. It's not just the basis that drives research, it's the basis for who you are as an individual. Right? If any of you have taken any of my courses, like a leadership course, we start reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and that's the philosophical, that philosophically undergirds how we talk about leadership models and what that looks like from the get-go, because there's always a philosophical assumption undergirding every single thing that you do. We just don't think about it, but there is. Okay? Saturate the literature on your topic. You have to read all the time. If you have an idea, If you want to look at, I knew I wanted to look at Latinas. I didn't know when what, but I'm like, I'm gonna start reading about Latinas. Let's from day one. I was like, let me see every week. Before every semester, I would print out what's current from the last year, and I would pick an article to read every week that had nothing to do with coursework. Nothing. But it had to do about the population I wanted to look at. Or the population I thought I kind of wanted to look at. Right? And so what happens when we have a lot of literature is that we saturate not only just the literature, but we saturate our brains. Right? Because it's you have a lot of information. Sorry, I'm totally just lying on your stuff. You have a reading card template that was attached, that you also were given out as a handout. This for me has been a very resourceful tool. I got this from faculty when I was at A&M in College Station. And it would just have full APA reference, purpose or the article study, methods used, findings, conclusions, my reactions, how the article study informs a better understanding of your chosen problem of practice or whatever phenomena you're looking at, how it relates to practitioners, and then general reflections. So that we can shift around. The last three you shift around to focus on your particular phenomena, and it starts to keep a running tally. Because I don't know about y'all, but sometimes when I started reading articles, I would make notes, and then I'm like, I could use that article. It's in that pile over there somewhere. But I don't know where it's at. I know that happens to nobody because I know y'all have better sense. But it has been a very fruitful tool for me, not in terms of just my dissertation, but also when I write manuscripts. I start pulling, it's like, okay, here's the gist. I'm going to put it down here. I have the APA reference done, and I'm going to go back into my catalog and say, this is a manuscript I'm working on. These are the 15, 20 templates that I have, and this is what I need to pull from. Okay, so when you saturate the literature, and obviously writing the literature review is completely different, right? That's a whole other beast in and of itself, which is probably in the entire class, right? But when you write a review of literature, you either have streams of consciousness or you have schools of thoughts. Those are two ways that you can frame your lit reviews. So your streams of consciousness, if you're looking at, for me, I was looking at Latinas in engineering. So I looked at social support networks, I looked at family, and I looked at student organizations. Those were the three streams of consciousness that I used to inform my larger research question. The schools of thought approach is, this is what X person says, or X theorists contend this, but other theories suggest otherwise. So it's this is what people say, so it's either streams of consciousness or schools of thoughts. I can't give you a lit review class, but the gist of the lit review is those are two different ways. You either do streams of consciousness or you look at schools of thoughts in terms of framing the lit review itself. But reading the review of literature or the literature in your topic is incredibly important. I think a lot of the issues, what happens is that we don't know how to manage it because it's a lot. Like when you read a lot, right, it's a lot to manage. And so hopefully that particular tool for me is very useful. Feel free to use whatever you'd like, but that's kind of a way for me to minimize the mess everywhere. Yes, ma'am.
So talk about streams of consciousness again. Would it be like subheadings in which you're writing?
Right. So it would just be like general topics. So think of when you write or when you're trying to get your phenomena, think of it as a funnel, and you're starting very broad, okay, right? And then you work its way down until you get to the phenomena.
So would schools of thought be very broad?
No. So their schools of thoughts go, this theory support this, have this view, and these other theorists have the opposite view of this. Okay. Right. So you have two different schools of thought. You're yay or nay. Okay. Right. And your streams of consciousness is looking at, based on your theoretical framework, if I'm talking about student success, and I looked at social support networks. So I look at familial role, I looked at student organizations, and I looked at peer support. Those were the three streams of consciousness in which I framed the review of literature. So either streams of consciousness or schools of thought. So when you're thinking about the lit review on how to compartmentalize everything you're reading, because that's very important, it can be overwhelming if you're not sure what to do with everything.
Okay, so if I was looking at second language acquisition, motivation might be a stream of consciousness.
Right. Okay. So you can look at either whether it's intrinsic motivation in general, intrinsic motivation, and then extrinsic motivation. And so then you could look at family role, administrator role, teacher roles, and then you could do the same 3 subsections for each to have parallel in the streams of consciousness in which you're framing it, if it aligns with your theoretical framework, right? Critically examine empirical research studies. Obviously, the review of literature should, for the most part, be done on articles that are empirical studies, right? But look at them. If you're doing quant and it's a qual one, don't discard it, and vice versa, right? But don't just read it to gain information. Read it to examine it critically, right? It's not the same exact topic that I want to look at, but they framed it within this lens, and this is the methods that they used. So always look at their theoretical framework or conceptual framework and the methods used. So you can start to see patterns of what is dominant in how that particular issue is being framed. That could help or could say, okay, well, there's a gap. They're only looking at, right? So we look at Latinos in engineering. A lot of what we find about the Latino population is that the families is very important to student success, particularly the role of the mother, right? Well, I was like, okay, here's the literature, this is what it's telling me. When I interviewed my participants in several studies, they all emphasized the role of the father and barely mentioned the mother as engineering students, right? So it doesn't mean that every theoretical framework is the same, but you can look at to see how other people are framing similar phenomena. It'll help generate ideas for you. Okay, so don't just consume the literature for knowledge or just for literature, but critically examine what those studies, what they're incorporating in terms of methods and their theoretical framework. Everything has to align with your philosophical assumptions. Again, the heuristic chart would be very helpful. It's very, very time consuming, but it will be very helpful in terms of knowing which particular theoretical frameworks align with whatever paradigm you're operating out of. And there's books that tell you which methods are appropriate for those particular paradigms of thoughts. Okay. No, it's a long process. It's iterative. Like you're always, right? Sometimes people don't want to start writing things. You should start writing things all the time. Have a book, have a notebook next to your desk. Or I used to have one to bed. I don't think that was very healthy, but I had a book next to bed when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my dissertation study. But sometimes in the middle of the night, or I couldn't sleep, I know y'all don't have that problem. You probably sleep soundly every day. But when I had anxiety because I didn't know what I wanted to examine, I just could not sleep. And I think I was dreaming, I couldn't get into that REM cycle because I was thinking of all these ideas of what I wanted my study to be. And I just couldn't sleep. So I literally just had a notebook and I would pull out, here's the date, these are the thoughts I have. And I would read them over the next day. And that helped kind of reshape what I was trying to examine. But you have to write it down. That's very key. Because sometimes we'll say, I don't know what it is, so I don't want to write it down. Write it down because you're going to take it off and erase it and delete it, and it's probably never going to look like the first research question you came up with or the first theoretical framework. But it gives you a particular foundation or a scratch. You can look at it and you can examine it side by side and say, you know what, that's not the best way to get at this. Okay, I'm going to have to mark it out and list to the side why this is not the best fit. And then go back. Over and over and over again. Let's not be sad. We look like we're sad, so don't be sad, right? They're continuously reframed. It's never. So sometimes we have the research courses and people have students come out with drafts of chapters 1, 2, and 3. And they work with, hopefully, chairs at that particular time in our department, and we kind of give feedback. But even then, the feedback continues 6 or 7 months later, right, on the same document because we rework it. And so it's very time consuming. So don't get discouraged if you think man, I can't get the right research question, or I can't. It took me 9 months, almost 10 months to put my proposal together for my dissertation because I couldn't figure out the right theoretical framework. And my chair didn't tell me. He was like, okay, you need to go back. This is not fitting X, Y, and Z of what you want to get at. So let's go back and think of other theoretical frameworks you can look at.
It took you how long?
About 9 months to put my proposal together. Because my chair was not on board with my theoretical framework. He was like, this is not the best way to get at what you're trying to get at, unless you want to change your research questions. And I didn't want to change my research questions, right? It wasn't the best fit. There's always a fit for it. I don't want to say the best dissertation is a dissertation, but your chair has a lot of input, right? Like you know that your chair, she or he hopefully is guiding the study, but part of it, at least the way that I chair, is that you're kind of close. This sounds like a good idea, but let's think about other alternative perspectives, or how can this be reframed? And it becomes that process for you, because you have to discover it for yourself. That's how you get to aligning all of these. But it all starts with your philosophical assumptions. If you don't know where you stand on your ontology or your epistemology or your axiology when it comes to your phenomena, you're never going to get to this other part. It's going to block everything else for you, because it's not going to allow you to see it, because you haven't recognized it within your own consciousness. Questions about challenges? I don't like obstacles because it feels like you can't move them, but challenges, we all enjoy them and we want to get, I was like, I like a good challenge. So what challenges? My email's addressed down there, so I know I don't have all of y'all, I don't know all of y'all, but if you'd like to shoot me an email, by all means, shoot me an email with any follow-up questions, or if you want to meet, I'd be happy to do that as well. Challenges, anticipated challenges. Where are we at in the process? We probably should have started with that, so I apologize that we didn't. Let's go around the room. Let's start where we're at in the process. We'll start back there.
Okay.
Your name, and then tell us the program, and then.
I'm Maureen Sullivan. I am a CNI, focusing on literature. I am, I'm terrible with titles. Doing curriculum research design right now with Dr. Valadez. So I have one more course, then comps, then that's it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm still working on that question.
Yeah.
I'm really, so I have, and I don't know where any of this would fit in, because I didn't even realize until like 2 weeks ago it was even a possibility. So I have a huge background in history.
Yeah.
I have a BA and an MA in Russian history. So I love history, but I also love education. So then I found out that I could do a historical research analysis. And I was like, so now that kind of threw a whole different, so I guess my question, it could be quant or qual even in historical, correct? Depending on what I'm looking at?
I think that most of the, and I could be wrong, but I think most of the historical methods that I've used in terms of studies have been a form of document analyses.
Okay.
And so then it's not considered qual or, I don't know what it's considered, but it's a document analyses of information, right?
Okay.
That makes sense.
So so one of, so right now where I'm in the process, I'm thinking about the Caldecotts, the Caldecott books, and I'm also really interested in social emotional learning and how authors have the Caldecotts have won all these awards, and I'm very interested in how social emotional pieces are in these different books, and the trend. Is there a trend? Are we doing more of that? Are we doing and that's, I've just started. I didn't realize that the historical piece could even be a part of it.
Yeah.
So I'm in the swamp trying to keep with it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it ultimately depends, I guess, also on what your chair, if you have a chair, what your chair, have those discussions with your chair.
Yeah. And that's who brought it up to me. I was like, oh my God, Dr.
But I have, but I have colleagues who have a literary, that was the basis of their dissertation, their method of it. It was more of a document analysis.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. All right. Fantastic. We're all going to work. Yes, ma'am.
I would just like to tell you, you're interested in social emotional learning.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Dr. Quavy Scruggs with Alchemy Incorporated?
Alchemy? A-L-C-H.
It's A-L-C-H-E-M-Y.
Right?
He has done some phenomenal research.
Really?
And he works with primarily inner-city African-American youth, male youth.
Okay.
And he has this program, and what he does is he uses African mythology to foster social emotional learning in these young men, and it's just been phenomenal. And the research, I forgot what university the research is connected with, but you'll see it when you look on the
I'll just look at
website.
that. Thank you so much.
It actually has increased everything from high school graduation rates, college acceptance. I mean, the research is just phenomenal. I
Cool.
encourage you to look
Yeah,
at it.
All right.
Thank
That's
you.
fantastic. Thank you. So we'll go around the room still. Go ahead, David.
I'm Sophia Hoffman. I'm in biology, working with Dr. Prophet and Dr. Devlin. I'm just starting the whole reading everything.
Yeah, the fun part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm working with mangroves in a sort of a population ecology standpoint, how they're growing compared to everything around, how all the other organisms are interacting, but
Fantastic.
still figuring out my question.
Right. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
So my name is Xindan. I'm a marine biology student. I'm working with Dr. Ricardo Mozzacchioli, and we are doing the learning and memory, but using an invertebrate animal model. So right now we are working on the learning and memory deficit caused by food deprivation. And I'm in the stage of writing the proposal. And the most challenge for me for now, I think, is to build the relationship from the invertebrate animal to
Yes. Yes. That sounds fascinating. It's a totally different part of my brain too, to even conceptualize what that looks like, but that's fascinating, absolutely. And you're reading through the literature and so forth. Yeah. Okay. Good. Fantastic. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm in the Educational Leadership Program, and my study is on first-generation Hispanic student athletes from non-revenue sports, and I'm looking at their experiences in terms of student engagement services and activities, and how it affects their persistence to degree. So what they attribute to their persistence to degree.
All right. Thank you, Nikki. Jackson, yes.
My name is Joyce Gutierrez. I am in the EDLD program here. I am in the stage of where I have to form my question. I am not confident at all how I'm going to put this question together. But I do know that I do want to look at a leadership perspective, specifically to shared governance, like faculty, university administration, and board of trustees.
All right.
I'm thinking about using a multicultural framework because I think that's important. However, after sessions like this, I always question if I'm asking the right question or not.
Right. Great. And part of reading the literature too is that if you saturate the literature, then you start to see how your phenomena is not being explored, which is also important to help shape your research question, right? Because if you're trying to get an angle that nobody's gotten at yet, right? Reading it about your phenomena over and over again and seeing this is what they found when they did this, this is what they found when they did this, these were the results of, and then you start looking at that in a schemata, like in a larger sense, and say, okay, everybody's talking about A, B, C, D, E, but nobody's mentioned why. And this is important. Why? I would think this is important, and why is it not important, or why hasn't it been examined? And so even when you saturate the literature, that also will help frame the very first preliminary research question, because we scratch them out and they never looked at the first my final research question or research questions were never the first questions I came up with. They weren't even near. I don't even know how many drafts I had gone through before it became the final question in and of itself. So thank you, Joyson.
Hi, my name is Yolanda Reina. I'm in educational leadership, and I'm in the beginning stages, I guess, of framing my question, but I'm changing it towards school leaders and school and safety. And so,
fantastic, great.
Reading a lot of
literature. Good.
I'm Renita Newton, currently a master's level student in the counseling program, but I do have certain research interests on like recidivism and minoritized populations. So I've been doing some reading on that. I haven't actually gotten to this part.
Yeah, fantastic. You're thinking, it's building in. All right, fantastic. Wow.
My name is Annie. I'm also just a master's student.
Yeah. Well, not only, but yes, master's studies. Yeah, no, you're fine.
In clinical psychology, and so I just thought that this would be really helpful to the start of because I do want to do a master's thesis.
Yeah.
I don't know quite yet exactly what specific phenomena that I want to study, but right now it's somewhere in the feminist identity and perceptions, like self-perceptions, and if there's a cognitive dissonance of do they still believe in these identities and values, but maybe they aren't doing it, or the opposite, like they are doing it, but they don't say that they believe in it.
Yeah.
And so why is that happening and things like that.
Huh? Fascinating. Yeah. Not just only a no, but no, it's okay. I have students in class and they'll say like, I'm only a teacher. I'm like, we're never only just anything. So just yes, fantastic. Master's rolls into the doctor, but thesis is fantastic. Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm Mario Gonzalez. I'm in the master's in math curriculum content option. So right now, I'm this is like my first semester here, so I'm so my graduate advisor.
Yeah, great.
Graduate advisor is just having me read research articles and summarizing them.
Yeah.
But, like I guess my my topic would kind of focus more on higher level students' understanding and development of higher level mathematics. So she's making me read articles on students' understanding and development of proofs.
Oh, nice. Fantastic. Great. Interesting.
I'm Freddie Gonzalez in the CNI PhD program. And I registered because I need to start framing my question also, and I foresee many sleepless nights.
Yes.
Just like yourself.
Welcome to the madness.
My master's thesis was how bot curriculums affect teacher retention, student performance, and things of that nature. So I might go along somewhere, down that path, but I'm sure it's going to change.
Right.
And I'm down to my, I guess, last research classes. I'm in qualitative right now, and I'll need a few more before the seminar and dissertation. So I really need to start thinking about that.
Okay.
That's why I'm here.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you.
So I'm Emily Moreno. I'm also a master's student, but within the English department. I'm looking to do a creative thesis specifically looking at women identity, power, and trauma. It's my first semester, so I just started. So I'm already trying to lay down the work here.
Great. Fantastic. I'm very happy, first of all, because I don't think when I was a master's student in first semester was I sitting in boot camp. So I appreciate that, because y'all are way ahead of the, sometimes if I can make it, y'all do it. I appreciate it. It's fantastic. Welcome. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Jennifer Holloman. I'm a master's student in the reading program.
Yeah.
I'm here because I'm trying to switch gears in my brain. All of my experience in research has been quantitative.
Yeah.
I have a psychology degree from University of Southern Mississippi, and they really, it's kind of weird because they're social science, but you would think that they would be more qualitative, but they actually compete a lot with the hard sciences and really push psychology as a science, which is fine and dandy. But so they emphasize quantitative research a lot. So that's basically what I did. I still collaborate with a couple of professors in Mississippi on research, all quantitative, of course. So whenever I came into this program, my brain was quantitative, quantitative. But everybody was saying qualitative, qualitative, qualitative. But not that they were telling me to do that, but just an encouragement.
Right.
And so I said, well, I need to understand it. It helps when our processes are focused categorically toward a specific task. And I didn't know how to categorize it. And so one thing that I'm doing is I'm taking a course, a master's course that I don't need for my program, which is professional writing from the English department with Dr. Quick. And the theme of it is
she's wonderful.
research, so that's I'm really having fun with that. I have not. I'm still coming up with my thesis idea. And the reason why is because I've been so stuck in quantitative that all of my ideas have been quantitative.
Yes.
So I just, as soon as my brain fully switches gears, then I will decide what I want to do. But for Dr. Quick's class, I'm doing a qualitative study in second language acquisition. People who learned English as adults. And I'm trying to examine the experiential elements of coming awake in a new language. I want to add like a psychological twist to it because I love psychology. So I'm kind of examining some things about the unconscious mind, such as, do you dream in English, and at what point did you start dreaming? Because, what parts of the mind are actually engaged whenever we come awake at a new language.
Right. Interesting. Fantastic. That sounds great. Thank you.
My name is Jennifer White. I'm working on my PhD in counselor education. I also have a background in psychology, and same thing where I was training, they were all about quantitative research, and I heard very, very little about qualitative until I came here. But the topic that most interests me and that I really want to focus on for my dissertation, I really think a qualitative approach is more appropriate because there's very little research that's currently exists on my topic, and we really need sort of a foundational thing. And for some of my research questions, really qualitative design would be more appropriate. So I am trying to kind of shift gears like you were discussing, but also I'm also trying to narrow what I'm doing because I've got 1,000 questions about my topic and I can't answer them all in one dissertation. So I'm trying to kind of figure that out. And I was talking to somebody yesterday about that, and also about sort of clarifying my theoretical stance. And so this has been really helpful and really timely for where I'm at in the process.
Good, fantastic, great. And just go back to think of the funnel, right, in of itself. So everything when you're thinking of a particular topic, whether it's for a thesis or a dissertation, we have these, it's very broad, right? And then we have 10,000 questions to the broadness, right? But helping to saturate that literature starts to, and then you research what you're drawn to, what you are personally invested in terms of it just being interesting to you, because you're going to spend a lot of time reading a lot of research about that particular topic. And so that's also very important, right? Because we always enjoy the things that we like, right? Sometimes you have to go, people make you do something, you're like, oh God, I don't particularly care to be here, but I'll be here. But when you enjoy the space you're going to be in, or whether it's mentally or physically, right, you're more invested in it. So I kind of would just always encourage to do something that speaks to you. So I have I have some hours in my doc program where in ed psych, and so I was the only person who was not in ed psych taking ed psych courses, and we would have to do like articles to kind of share, and and it was a 15-minute presentation, so everybody had 15 minutes, and everybody did quant because it's heavily quant. I didn't realize that, but it's heavily quant, and I found some that were qualitative in nature, and my presentation was like an hour and a half because they could not compute how you could possibly, in multiple truths, talk about ed psychology when it's always been quantified through quantitative methods, right? So it was a very interesting, because even the faculty member was very, this is the equivalency to this, and there's no equivalency. It's like apples and oranges when you talk about quant and qual, because the philosophical assumptions are already so on different worlds, right? So if people try to compare it and say it's kind of the same thing, it's not the same thing. You're comparing two completely different apples and oranges, so to speak. But I can completely relate to that, because I was like, what's wrong with you guys? Why is everything quant? And they were saying the same thing. He was like, why is that qual? That doesn't even make sense. Like, how is that valid? And we mostly had discussions about the validity of both methods, which is quite fascinating, so to speak. But Roman, we're gonna let you go, because I know.
I'm started. I'm at the end. I'm done. I'll just hear.
He's a dissertation.
Dr. Bondis is getting more than me, so.
He's defending his dissertation this week, right? Tuesday?
I'm doing my research on coaches and clients of Natasha's law. Y'all know Natasha's law? That is the state's concussion law. And so you want to know about risk.
Right.
Some of these coaches really don't like you.
Right.
I've gotten some crazy emails sometimes.
Right.
But it's been a pleasure.
Right.
And I will tell you, you're all going to lose your hair.
Yeah.
By the time you're, no, I'm just kidding.
Right.
It really does. It just, but you're going to be tired.
Right.
My eyes are puffy. I'm just tired. I just want to sleep for the next 6 months. So once you get there, you'll know. And luckily, Dr. Bowden, too bad y'all never going to meet him. Man, he's wonderful man. And he definitely guided me through the process. And if y'all ever think quantitative is just short and brief, someone's lying to you, because mine is 300 pages. And so, well, 307 pages.
Right.
And it could have gotten longer, but I think we got to the point where we started cutting some stuff. And so it was, and the research questions you talked about, I actually did change mine once I started getting the data in, because in determining, well, was it really measuring that it was supposed to be measuring?
Right, absolutely.
And I just didn't feel right with it.
Right.
And you have to go through it with your chairperson before you start doing something.
Right.
Especially those.
Right.
And he agreed with me and we kind of changed that. So
Right.
there's always constant change.
Right.
So don't feel that
Right.
bad about it.
Right.
Even though I was mad about it.
Right. Well, and and so when you think about, which is a good point, when you think about changing, whether it's the research questions, because they are going to change, is that you trust your methodologist and your chair. They're not always the same people, right? But you have to trust them. Like if they're going to guide you in that particular process, they will. They'll never steer you the wrong way. But it's a long process, and you're in grad school, you don't get any sleep. If you're going into faculty life, you won't get sleep either, so we'll be all sleepless. But you really have to know your philosophical assumptions in general, and then philosophical assumptions in relation to the phenomena you're examining, because they typically align. We just don't know it. We can't, because if you're creating truth or knowledge, I'm not going to create new knowledge that I'm going to copyright as intellectual property to me if it's not something that I value as knowledge. I value multiple perspectives. So I won't ever do a quantitative study because it does not align with the way that I make sense of the world for me. That's not to say that there's not research on both methods for your topic, right? So there's a lot of research about Latinas in engineering that's quantitative in nature that informs my work, and qualitative in nature and that informs quant, and vice versa. So we have to appreciate both methods, but understand where your alignment is when it comes to your philosophical assumptions, and that's going to drive your research questions, your theoretical stats, and so forth. So I appreciate y'all being here. You have my email address. I'll probably send Agnes, or I can get a list of email addresses and send Agnes, or send y'all these particular documents on a Word document so that you can kind of work on it and so forth. And I'll send out a doodle poll for later this semester, because it'll take you a minute to fill out at least some of the heuristic chart, or at least part of where you think you're going to fall into. And I'd be happy to come back and workshop that one evening or one Saturday with y'all as well. So please don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions, and I'll stick around for a little bit if you need anything else. But I wish you well. Stick with it, because everybody gets done. You just got to work at it. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you.